Okay, so thanks again to everyone for being here. That's the perhaps overstated intro from me, and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome our first guest of the day, and I think it's the perfect note to start this event and pick up on some of the themes we're going to be talking about really throughout the conference when we talk about mitigating disruption as well as looking to the future, because obviously we need to still look to the future despite all the challenges, and the use of data and visibility and systems, and critically having support at some of the highest levels of a company. Our first guest joined IAC in 2018 as Chief Supply Chain Officer and has more than 25 years experience in supply chain, including as Global Head of Procurement and Supply Chain at Adient before joining IAC. I'm so pleased to welcome Kelly Bysouth. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
So Kelly, thanks for joining us. I wanted to start. We'll take our respective seats from the opposite heads of the table here. You joined the company in 2018. Quite a bit has changed and happened in the supply chain since then. Has that changed aspects of your role and the wider supply chain purchasing organization at IAC?
Yeah. So obviously we already you touched on some of the I'd say headwinds that we've all experienced over the last 18 months, and unfortunately appears that will continue to linger for the next several months. But yeah, I mean, when I came over to IAC, I spent the first year there. We were in a relatively normal, I guess, environment, and really spent most of my time creating the organization that I wanted to kind of live on. So worked a lot on that. And then we actually were starting to get settled about a year in, and obviously got hit with, COVID and then the lingering effects of COVID. So certainly I would say in the last 2 years, year and a half to 2 years, I've spent a lot more time, my team and I have spent a lot more time in traditional crisis management, which we all have, all of us who have been in functional supply chain roles. And so that's really been our focus, right or wrong. I have to say that it's not my favorite thing to do, to be firefighting. But with that said, I am also really proud of what my team has done over that period of time to support our company. The procurement and supply chain team really did a lot of heavy lifting with all of the issues that we face, whether it be just flat out 3-month shutdown, with no really revenue coming in from our customers, which creates a huge challenge for the business. And then all of the other issues related to actual supply challenges. You mentioned, right, record raw material price increases. So everything that we do, whether it be traditional procurement or logistics, inventory management, cash flow management, has been significantly challenged. It's basically like a perfect storm of everything bad that could happen in an 18-month period of time has happened. And so I'm incredibly proud of how the team has dealt with those issues and helped our company get through to where we are today, right? And we'll continue to do those things. And we've really become very nimble, very agile. We've been able to make some strategic advancements in the midst of all of that crises management as well. So incredibly proud of what we've done. And again, my objective is always to strategically move things forward in a way where you can get out of the firefighting. You have to do it when you have to do it, unfortunately, but really, my end objective is always to create a more sustainable and mature supply chain that delivers value to the company. So hopefully, we'll get through this stuff here. It's lingered on longer than any of us would like, but we'll get through it. We always do.
We'll come on to some of the firefighting, but I wanted to stay for a moment on related to the organization and particularly your role, because we don't always often see chief supply chain officers, particularly at tier one suppliers, or even necessarily in the automotive industry. And I just wondered how important that supply chain perspective is at IAC, along with the procurement side, and particularly with your experience.
Right. So I know we had this discussion a couple of days ago as we were prepping for this event. So when I was approached by IAC to come, it was for a chief procurement officer role. And I said, okay, let's discuss, but I am not coming for anything other than a chief supply chain officer role. I need something that's broader in scope, more of an end-to-end role, because that's what I feel passionately about. So it's funny, you're right, you don't see it very often, and even when I was at Adient, I didn't have a chief supply chain officer role. I kind of got supply chain tucked under at a point in time, and that's kind of how that worked out there. But when coming into a new company, I said, absolutely, I'm not coming unless this is my title and this is my responsibility. So it's very important, especially in the last 18 to 24 months. Having someone in an executive leadership role in a company with that broader view is, whether it be across just a region or globally, is critically important to be able to manage through these types of situations, and then ultimately to advance a more strategic end-to-end view and more mature supply chain to take out cost, whether it be material cost, inventory cost, looking at that total cost of ownership, kind of, those decision points that you have to make on a day-to-day basis. So incredibly important, and you're right. I hope to see more tier ones, and even when you look at the OEMs, you really don't have a lot of people that have a chief supply chain officer title. There's a CPO title, or, so I think it's definitely evolving. If you can't look at any news outlet right now and not see the word supply chain. So everyone's talking about it. I still say that most people don't know what supply chain is, but it's getting there. It's getting there.
Yeah. Those astute will note the slight branding change at our own event and company, where it's from automotive logistics to automotive logistics and supply chain. And I suppose, as you alluded to, there's some interesting debates to be had about the definition itself. But
yes.
Here, clearly that integrated view is what's coming down to it. And I mean, another point on the leadership side, do you have sort of guiding principles in terms of leading such an organization? I imagine that some of that integrated view is a key part of that, but are there other things as well you would point to?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I try to keep it really simple when it comes to guiding principles. I always want to have, as sort of my North Star, delivering value to the business. And in supply chain, I think we do that in three main ways. Number one is enhancing profit, EBITDA, however you guys are managing measuring yourselves. And obviously that comes in a lot of different ways. That comes in managing your material costs, managing your logistics costs, et cetera. Improving working capital. So, in automotive, cash is king, and the more you can generate positive, improved working capital situation for the business, the better that comes in, whether you're effectively managing your supplier payment terms, driving down inventory, et cetera. And then the third main pillar that I focus on is really developing a best-in-class supply base for that delivers to the company, in terms of cost, delivery, quality, and service. So those are the three main pillars that I always try to focus on, and then ultimately building a team and having processes, systems, and tools that enables those objectives. And that's really kind of always what I focus on. The tactics in each of them, maybe varies over time, but I think if you're not focused as a first principle on delivering value to the company, and we are a service organization within our company, and we need to always be delivering value for the company.
And on the value point, is it Can supply chain management also be a competitive advantage for a tier one supplier?
Yes. I mean, if it's done well, it can be an incredible competitive advantage. Like I said, you can be generating enhanced working capital positions. You can obviously be making sourcing decisions that are creating a cost advantage for you as you're quoting business into your customers and potentially winning over others. If it's done poorly, it can be a huge problem. More and more at a tier one level, at least I'll speak to interiors because that's where all of my experience has been primarily. We are more and more a supply chain organization. I mean, if you look at the amount of cost that's coming in our cost of sales, it's 75% is coming from our purchase materials and logistics costs. And how you manage that can make or break. And we're working on margins that are not incredibly fat. So the more you can optimize those costs of sales and cost of material as a portion of sales is incredibly important. And then also too, not only that, but how you manage having the right inventory in your plant, but not too much in that balance. Because every time you have to expedite material into your plant, expedite material out of your plant to go to a customer, obviously that can eat away, a bad launch related to supply chain disruption problems that you're responsible for can eat away the entire annual profit of a program like that. So it's incredibly important to do it well, and when you don't do it well, it can really destroy, certainly the profitability of any particular program. So
I think we know, as you mentioned, it almost couldn't be worse than one can imagine at the moment in the supply chain. And so what you just described, managing that cash flow, things like that, in terms of the state of the supply chain nation, where would you put it right now for IAC?
Yeah, we have a lot of headwinds, right? I mean, like I said, it's kind of a perfect storm of everything, not wonderful. I kind of look at it as this past, just say 2021 is almost more difficult than last year with the COVID situation, because obviously last year we had 2-3 months of basically everything stopped. We had that revenue stream stopped, which is very difficult for anyone in the automotive space because we're a really capital intensive business. So that was hard. This year, it's worse because of all the other issues, right? Material costs are, in a lot of cases, eating into our suppliers' margin that they would have had. Material costs, logistics costs, just the challenges of getting the materials in, all of the port issues, the container issues, there's the crazy freeze we had in February in Texas. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So it's not great. I will go back to what I said, that I feel incredibly proud of my team and how the IAC team in general has managed through all of these headwinds, because it's very rare that you get these things, right? You get these onesie twosies every year. You get a hurricane, you get an earthquake somewhere in Japan, you get stuff every year. There's something. This year it just seems like everything came and is hitting us at once. So it's, when you talk about the state of the supply chain as far as the headwinds, we continue to have challenges. How we're reacting to it, I think we're doing a pretty darn good job. I'm proud of what we're doing. So.
And what would you point to some of the really key points that have helped to mitigate some of that? We saw the poll result earlier where people think the key point is. I mean, where would you put them?
Yeah, and one of I think the highest rated was, we like to say, get a system. Well, yeah, that has its own challenges. Not to say I've implemented planning software in the past, and all of those tools are really helpful. But implementing a system is also a lot of work. So what we've done, I think we've done a really good job, is using what we have and trying to optimize the data that we have. Obviously, effectively managing supply chain is all about managing the data. We have thousands of part numbers, we have thousands of suppliers, we have thousands of OE pairs in a region, and effectively managing that data to serve up exceptions on, point you in the right direction to go deal with a challenge or predictively tell you where you may have a problem, and then you can go and take action versus just reacting after it's already happened, I think is what we have tried to focus on. We have not had personally the bandwidth to think about implementing some big system or software or even a layover software in the last couple of years because we are just consumed with the day-to-day business. But what we have done is you can do a lot with what you have, right? How do you pull effectively data out of the systems that you have? Because every one of our plants has an ERP. In North America, we happen to be pretty lucky because we are on at least a common platform. And we're moving that way in our other regions as well. So once we have, that common flat platform of that data, really how do you pull that and how do you effectively pull it up and analyze it and again serve up exceptions that you can go take action. I think that's what we've really worked a lot on that in the time I've been here, and again proud of that. And I think that's allowed us to be able to see some of these things and put measures in place before it becomes too late.
Mm-hmm. And has that in the sort of immediate term helped you to make quite quick flexible decisions, whether it's rerouting or finding alternative supply in the most immediate sense?
Yeah, I'll speak to, it's not in the automotive space, you guys know, it's not so easy to change sources for a lot of different reasons. Some of it's self-induced, some of it is, the testing requirements or the kind of specific requirements of all of our given customers, some of which is necessary, some of which you could argue is overkill. I think what we did do, I'll give you an example. So during the winter storm in February, March in Texas, the entire petrochemical industry was basically shut down almost, or very challenged. So I have to hand it to our entire team at IAC. We reacted very quickly to identify alternatives and get those alternatives in place to sort of piece together, enough to get us by until kind of things started to stabilize. So we can do it. We definitely can do it. And I always say, like, one of my favorite mottos is, don't waste a good crisis, because you can get a lot done when you don't have options. And again, I think we tend to, in the automotive space, make things more difficult than they need to be sometimes. But it's definitely, there's evidence where we've been able to make those changes. Now, when it comes to more complex parts that are tooled, almost impossible, right? It's almost impossible to make quick changes. And when it comes to changing modes of transportation, unfortunately, we can do it. It usually means we're changing from a normal freight mode, which is truck, to an airplane, which is not good, right? It drives cost. But obviously, we can do that when we have to do that. We try to minimize that as much as possible. But we've worked with our logistics partners in each of our major regions to effectively manage through those situations when we have to.
And thinking about it more on the, let's say, medium to longer term point. So obviously, as we talked about in the beginning, you want that integrated view on procurement, understanding impacts for logistics. Appreciate, as you say, sourcing takes a long time. But do you see the point now where we can make better long-term decisions? So whether that's to do with obviously a supplier location or even the engineering of a part, because we all know that a simpler supply chain is a simpler supply chain. A simpler part makes a simpler supply chain. Mm-hmm. So how much can we push the dial on that side?
Yeah. When it comes to, I think the automotive industry in general, and again, in all my tier 1 experience, I think we do a pretty good job of trying to take a holistic view of total cost of ownership. And I think, in my particular role, having an overall responsibility or view of not only just material costs, total landed costs, but also inventory costs, logistics costs, et cetera. I think we do a pretty good job. I think that tier ones in general do a pretty good job. I think when you talk about engineering and how we're engineering our parts, obviously we become a receiver of that information, some of which is driven by our customers, some of which is driven internally at any tier one. We now are having, really good conversations internally on, and ultimately we will with our customers too, in situations where we kind of put ourselves in a box where we only have one option. We try to get ahead of that now because we see the results of that, right? If you have a supply chain constraint where you have, again, what happened in the winter storms, where you have only one supplier that's approved in a particular material, and that supplier can't run their plant, then you pretty quickly have to figure out an alternative. So I think we're really focused now on making sure we always have more than one option from a material perspective, and don't get put into a box, because that's where costs can get driven up. So
yeah, you mentioned earlier cash is king in supply chain, and particularly I think now we see that. We've seen a lot, and this is in the press, in the mainstream press, let's say, lots of supply chain headlines, lots of move from just in time to just in case being discussed at many levels. It was pretty low in the poll result, I think, actually, or almost at the bottom. But where do you fall on that? I mean, clearly, it's not a one-size-fits-all. We need to be very strategic about which parts and material. But how do you see this balance between inventory management, cash flow, and risk potentially shifting or changing, especially as you have view of that data that you have now?
Yeah. Anytime I see just in case, I just see dollar bills, because it's just waste in my opinion. But we really try to approach inventory, and what we've done is, and this is another thing that, again, we've done a really nice job in the last, even in this period, last year and a half, we've really gone to more of an entitlement approach on inventory. So really objectively deciding how much inventory we need to hold in a given plant based on transit time primarily, right? So if we have parts coming in from China, we have to keep more inventory in hand. So we don't take a blanket approach on, hey, we're just going to hold inventory just in case. No, obviously those inventory levels are set by part, and unfortunately in the last year they've been creeping up because it takes longer to get parts over from China. But where we can minimize that, we absolutely do. I don't. The just in case, and we have actual facilities that are just in time, and just in time facilities work tremendously differently than more feeder facilities. So all of those have to take on their own nuances, but we're really very specifically setting inventory levels by part in each of our plants, and that's thousands of parts, just to strike that balance, right? Because again, like I said earlier, you don't want to be caught short and have to fly a plane. So it's always that fine balance, and there's been a lot of fluctuation in the last year based on everything that's been going on. It's primarily driven by transit time, so inbound transit time.
We have a session coming up after this on sustainability in the supply chain, and we know more and more companies are setting net carbon zero targets, especially in the interior space. I think the sustainable materials, reuse, et cetera, becomes more and more a focus. So how, as a chief supply chain officer, how is that influencing now some of the decisions and design of the supply chain as you look ahead to?
I'll talk a little bit about our products. So we're definitely putting more focus on how do we design products that answer that kind of need, that sustainability question, and having those discussions with our OEMs to say, hey, here's a product that we have that answers, kind of checks all of these boxes. when you look at the, this is always a big, kind of term that gets thrown out there, but it's very difficult to get your arms around is, net zero supply chain. I mean, this is a very big endeavor. So I would say IAC has been primarily focused thus far on understanding and driving down our carbon emissions within our four walls. We're now taking that to our extended supply chain. So we've just kicked off an initiative around a robust reporting approach for getting that data from our own extended supply base. And then obviously getting the data is the first step, and then working with them to reduce those emissions is the next step. So it's a process. We're heading down the path. We're certainly not there yet. It's a big task. I mean, I know it's a nice buzzword to talk about, but there's a lot of work there to kind of get to that, to get even to the point where you can measure it. And then the next step is helping the suppliers, work proactively with you to take the emissions out of their business. So it's a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're running a bit over the time, but we started a couple minutes late, so I hope you don't mind just with a few more minutes. But on that point, we're not there yet, as you say, but can you see then in the relatively near term that emissions in logistics, let's say, will become a key KPI, perhaps even a determining metric, not entirely, but one of the determining metrics in a supply and manufacturing decision? And be honest.
If you want my PC answer, or do you want my honest answer? I think there's a long way to go, personally. Again, I know that our customers are putting out pretty lofty goals, and I think there's a lot that goes into this, right? There's a lot of government influence, in particular country, in different countries, when you go outside of the United States. There's infrastructure topics. There's a lot to get done to get to a point where we could really say we have zero emissions in an entire supply chain. If you think about it, in whether it be North America, Europe, or really anywhere in our business, it's all trucking related. So we are moving a tremendous amount of material every day on trucks. So if those trucks are not battery powered, you're not gonna really ever get to a zero emission situation, right? So you can have all kinds of renewable energy running your plants, but the trucks are really moving product back and forth in the entire automotive industry. So that I think is one of the bigger things to figure out to get to that point. And we're certainly not there yet. I mean, there's obviously things being worked on, but we're not mature there yet.
Understood.
Yeah.
We've had some questions coming in on the app. Again, I know we're running kind of low on time. We probably won't get to every question, and we could always follow up as well with Kelly to do that. I think we might even be able to show, if our team might be able to display some of those questions just on the side, just so that the audience can get a sense of them. We've had something on sustainability, which we've obviously just been speaking about. One question I wanted to just pick up out of here, because it relates to another question I had. The question is, do you see higher integration with logistics providers as a way to improve execution and manage emergency situations? Because I was also interested in how you might be seeing your relationships with providers evolve in this. Yeah.
So at IAC, and it's been my past experience as well, that I don't feel that actually managing logistics is a core competency of a tier one. We need to be focusing on other things. So for that reason, at IAC, and again in my past at Adient, we partnered with logistics providers, 3PLs, 4PLs, whatever you guys want to call it, LLP, to have a relationship per region. So this is certainly a regional discussion. And we have LLP relationships in North America and Europe. Asia is a little more fragmented, but we have those in place. I personally believe having the right relationship having clear objectives in that relationship, and having a provider that is the right fit for your particular business. Again, there's all sizes and shapes of tier ones, and there's all sizes and shapes of LLPs, and getting the right fit where you guys can work together effectively is critical. But again, I feel like having those relationships is much more beneficial than trying to do it yourself. So yes, I am a full supporter of that.
Let's, one of the last questions, we talked earlier on about your guiding principles and you kept them, very clear. Your vision for the IAC supply chain as a leader 3-5 years out. Hopefully, we're past some of these things now, although there's no guarantee. But what would what's the supply chain you want to be running, overseeing by the middle of this decade?
Yeah, I really would like to be able to say in 3 to 5 years that we have advanced the maturity of the supply chain holistically at IAC. I would actually, I started doing this in my past. I really want to start objectively measuring that and putting goals forward to how we really say, yes, it was here and now we're here. Again, in light of what I said earlier, I always, first and foremost, I want to deliver value to the company. Feed that. So really that's where I want to get to. And I want to have, a fully engaged team, because if you don't have that, you can't achieve your objectives. And I want to have the right processes, systems, and tools for the team to be able to get to that end vision. So I think, I'd like to keep it pretty simple.
And the last point, do you think it's so much headlines, I say visibility of the supply chain, not visibility in the sense that we necessarily want it, but let's say public visibility of it. Will that help actually? Will that also, I know it's hurting us in the bottom line, but does that help? Because maybe even at the top levels of a company, because now we see it.
Yeah.
The impacts are clear.
Yeah, I think so. I think, like I mentioned earlier, you can't look at anything, any post, any news article, anything, even on the news, anywhere, without hearing the word supply chain. And I laugh because when I took over supply chain responsibility at Adient back in 2016, I remember I spent a good year basically explaining to our entire team what supply chain was, like walking through there's, this, it's everything from raw material to customer delivery and all the pieces in between. And now it's kind of all over the place. I think it's definitely, when you talk about supply chain, people now will listen versus kind of just sort of glazing over. But I think there's still a lot to do as far as educating people what it means and why it's important and what it means to do it well. So, but definitely the visibility is there. So that is a good thing, right? When people at least can understand and have heard the term, I think it's moving things in a right direction versus just talking about procurement or logistics or, we talk about it in pieces in the past. Now we're using the term supply chain, which is a good thing.
Very much agreed, and I think your presence here and this discussion, this event, help hopefully to raise that profile and visibility in the right way. Kelly, thank you so much for being here and joining us. It's really been a pleasure, and I hope you have a chance to speak more, because there was other questions we couldn't quite get to, but we really appreciate you coming here today.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly.